Welcome to Cultivated Live for August, 7th? Holy man. August 7th, we're doing our quarterly check-in. Seems like with Mike Gorenstein, the chairman and CEO of Cronos. I'm here with Jeremy, my co-founder, but our editor-in-chief here at Cultivated. Jeremy, welcome. Mike Gorenstein, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
It looks like you're up against a fake background, but I think it actually really is a brick background.
I can't reach it, but it's a real one.
Yeah. That's good. It's good. It could either be real or fake, but that one it's a very good fake background if it's fake.
It looks like a stand-up set, kind of. So we're expecting some,
Yeah.
We'll try and make it funny then.
Get your quick 5 minutes. You're really locked in 5 minutes ready, Mike, because you're on the hot seat. Obviously, you released your earnings this week. Give us sort of the top line, then we'll dive into some of the things that we saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think good quarter overall. We're still, and we talked about this last quarter, we're still in the situation waiting for new supply to come on. So you're seeing bottom line improving as we allocate to just wherever highest margin markets are, and balancing that with kind of keeping a certain amount of supply in every market. But we still see really strong demand. We finished the expansion at GrowCo, so that should be coming online in the fall. We'll actually start getting harvest out. It's pretty excited about that. International looking great. Israel, I think is what we're happiest about, because not only are we performing well, but we had some worries about tariffs that ended up being vetoed, and so the market's status quo, which we're really pleased to see.
Yeah, I saw it. I mean, it's in the headline, so it wasn't that hard to read. But that piece, Naturals, is the number one selling cannabis brand in Israel. Did I read that right?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's been that way for a couple quarters. So things are going really well there. I think it's a kind of underappreciated market. The market's consolidated quite a bit, so I think you're starting to see a lot of maturation there. But I think that despite the issues going on, and not necessarily the cannabis issues, but just generally, you have a lot of geopolitical. It's been tough for a couple of years. Our team's really, really resilient, and I think people need cannabis in Israel right now, and we're making sure that we keep it consistently available.
I want to, because I sit in Toronto. Jeremy is Canadian, even though he's in New York. But talk about it seemed like a benefit early on to be a Canadian-based business. It seemed like there was a big dip where it seemed like everybody was in a real world of hurt. But even lately, comparing sort of what is happening with Canadian-based companies versus U.S.-based companies, certainly the ones that are publicly traded, there seems to be advantage to being in Canada because the international markets are open. Like, did you think that would be a game plan on day one when you started?
I mean, look, on day one when I started, and I think I expected the U.S. would have been legal much sooner, but we've been pretty consistent. The strategy was use Canada. The advantage would be a place where you could sort of develop everything, get your IP developed, build the brands out, understand how to operate, and then as markets move, we'd have the flexibility and optionality to move in. And then there was a point where early on we're like, okay, we think Europe is going to open much faster, right? We think that Australia is going to open fast, and then I think everything really changed around COVID. I think that COVID sort of stopped all the momentum. I think that the Ukraine-Russia war sort of stopped things, so it just became less of a priority in different markets. And now I think you're just starting to see things kind of return to growth. So I don't know if it's so much advantage or disadvantage in U.S. or Canada. I think a lot of it is which company you are, how you're operating, what you're doing. I think that part of that is you're seeing more attention on kind of business fundamentals than you used to, whereas early on it was you're a U.S. company and you have this plan. You're a Canada company, you have this plan. And now it's like, okay, let's see what the companies are doing. And we're still not quite there, but we're making progress, and people are, I think, starting to look more at results and base things off of that than it is on just where are you based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mike, I want to drill into that a little bit further. You talked about Israel. You talked about the international opportunity. We've heard similar things in some different countries from your peer companies, how the international opportunity is perhaps the most exciting right now. Drilling into that further, how advantageous is it to be based in a country where there is top-down coherent federal regulations in order to take advantage of those international opportunities? How much of a difference does that make? And I guess, do you feel like it's a head start over some of your US peers?
Yeah, I think, I think it's also how your infrastructure is built and what infrastructure you have. So because we're, a federally legal, you're really building, and we all expected to build for scale in, one location versus if you're in the States, you have different regulations. You're going, you're basically producing product for your state. You're not thinking, hey, I need to ship to the whole country or ship internationally. So I think because of that, you build out for more scale, you have more fixed cost absorption. And then, look, there's a real thing for currency, for labor costs that you do have an advantage. But I don't think that's just Canada, right? I think any of the federally legal jurisdictions, if you were designing yourself to be a much more wholesale oriented, supply chain, that's going to look a lot different than if you're in the US. And, if you think of the US companies, a lot of them are much more retailers that, because of the way it was developed, they were fundamentally like, okay, we need to build supply for our stores. And not all of them are the same. 5-10 years from now, you might see some become pure play retailers. Some may transition to be more brands. But I think that was the key thing in how companies built themselves out. As, are you planning on the internet? And I don't think most of the US companies, have been focused. They also, if you want to enter Europe, you can't ship from the US. So, and given the size of the market in the US, I don't think many of them have thought about it, too much. So I think it's certainly an advantage, but there's pros and cons of both.
Well, Jeremy just said the word coherent federal policy, which made me giggle because we were talking about the U.S. But talk a bit about going back to Canada, if we could, because within the past, month, we saw an investment from Cronos into High Tide. You're going to describe what exactly that means, but talk about what that means, what it means for you, and what it means for High Tide as well.
Yeah, no, for us, we obviously are in a position, we've been pretty careful and patient with capital. A lot of what we think is important is making sure you stay in your lane, keep your focus. I appreciate that both High Tide and us really have this belief in, like, if you perform in your own area and you focus on it and become best in class in it, then you spread other places. That's the key to being successful. I think, we had the availability capital wise. We don't think that it's going to affect our ability to go do other strategic things we need to. So the way we structured it, we keep, roughly the same cash interest every quarter that we're getting today. But given the OID, at the end of the 5 years, we would get, additional return. And I think the company valuation wise, it's got a lot of room. I think that they sort of missed the part of the cycle where investors kind of picked anyone early and gave them the most attention. So I think the valuation's extremely reasonable. I mean, you can see from other activity, I don't know how visible it is to those outside of the industry, but there's a lot of people that have sort of looked at that as sort of a crown jewel and a target. And I think that from High Tide's perspective, this gives them more runway to keep building and grow and execute on their plans. And I think maybe bigger picture, like, it just reinforces that there's a place for people that want to stay sort of, independent within their own verticals, avoid vertical integration, and keep that going. And, we appreciate that we have the shared view.
Turning to the domestic Canadian market, Mike, I just want to get a sense of how Cronos is thinking about it. If and where you see growth in terms of the cannabis consumer market in Canada and what that might look like in the near future.
So short term for us, the biggest growth is just having enough flower to meet demand. That's been, again, a real struggle for us, that as you're seeing international growth, we're seeing continued strength in Israel. That has to come from somewhere pre-expansion, and we wanted to make sure we have the same quality flower. If we don't have something that can meet our spec third party, then we just don't fill orders. So I think that's certainly something for us that's important. I still think pre-rolls is a big area of growth. I think you're going to see more of that. And as just we continue to scale with or without regulatory change, I think taking more share from the illicit market is something that you could see pick up. But overall, the market's still growing. There's still opportunity. And I think continuing to innovate, that's the thing is we still are early, in the product cycle. I still think there's other products we can bring to market. We have a lot of great strains in our pipeline. We've probably had one of the most extensive breeding programs in the industry. And so, a few years ago when we talked about it, we're like, okay, now it took us so long to get to, momentum wise, because all we were doing was really R&D, developing. And now sort of every year you'll see those products that we've been working on for 5 years come out. So yeah, I think that's kind of the key there. And then, hanging on until there's some regulatory change. If there's not regulatory change, I think unfortunately the growth will come from, other companies not being able to hold on and exiting the industry. There's regulatory change. I think it expands the pie for everyone.
Go ahead, Jay.
I was going to go more to the product level. Like, obviously, you're operating in more than one market. The markets that you're operating in outside of Canada are less mature and earlier days. Do they follow a similar cycle of what sort of products people are looking for from day like 1 to 365, 366 to like the second year? Or is it sort of heightened up because you're a company bringing it? Meaning, is the surge in pre-rolls in Israel? I don't even know what the product array is. Like, does that happen in year 2 as opposed to in Canada where it happened in year 4 and 5?
Honestly, a lot of it is regulation, right? Like if, for example, Quebec, we would certainly under-index to Quebec because there's no edibles allowed, and we're very strong in edibles. Or one of the challenges we have in Quebec is there's a 30% THC cap, and that honestly is our biggest struggle is meeting that, because we bred and we design to have things that are higher potency, and so it's harder to hit. I think if you see regulatory change where they allow more products, then you'll start to see a big shift. The only thing that I would hesitate on, and you see this, and you could look at tobacco as sort of an example, but you do have a little bit of different consumer preferences outside of North America. So cannabis is mixed with tobacco. So I think flower is probably a little stronger than pre-rolls. You don't have as much use of vapes versus say like heat not burn or modern oral. So I think edibles will be really strong, but it could take time for pre-rolls to catch on. One reason I think that they probably use tobacco is just the tax policy is a little bit different. But also cannabis is still a lot more expensive in Europe than it is in the US. So, they call it a pure pre-roll is just more expensive. So I think it'll take a little bit of time to follow that curve, but I still do believe that eventually you're going to see that. And I will say hash is a much more important thing overseas than it is, in North America. I think hash has sort of been replaced by, like rosins, caviar, shatters. Hash has sort of been like the forgotten extract, and that's still pretty popular in Europe.
Mike, I wanted to ask about beverages a little bit and how you view that market. In the US, obviously, it's all the rage, created by the Farm Bill, right? The hemp-derived stuff. In Canada, we're seeing some pretty interesting product innovation. I mean, we've had some people on the show who are working on interesting products, but I'm just wondering what you're seeing, from the top of the market. Like, are you bullish on beverages in Canada? Do you think it's a regulatory thing in the US, or just how are you looking at that market in general?
I think beverages is something that sounds really exciting for management teams. It sounds really exciting for investors because you can say, oh, hey, look, you drink alcohol, so obviously you're going to drink cannabis. I think that it's really easy to get trial in cannabis. People will always try new products. I think the question is, will they repurchase? And so sure, you have a distribution advantage, over other formats in the US, but the industry, while I say it's new and there's innovation, it's not that new. We kind of can see what consumers prefer. And I'm not saying beverages will go away or won't be a thing. It's just, is it going to be a 5 share, a 10 share? Like that's a lot of, that still would be a lot of growth to get there. I think that, look, my response when people say like, you don't drink alcohol, or so you don't smoke alcohol, is like, well, you don't drink nicotine. It's a different ritual. It's a different thing. When you consume, and this is for edibles too, but when you consume THC, with, with goes through your liver, it hydrogenates, it changes, it's a different impact. So it's really going back to the edible category. And then the question is, would you rather have an edible or a beverage?
Right.
Then there's the actually way you use it, right? So if you think about it, most people aren't going to bars to, to use cannabis, or they like the ritual stepping outside, smoking or vaping with a friend. But edibles, much easier to ship. From a distribution perspective, you got to really think about that. If you're a retailer, right, and you're looking like tighter margins as a retailer, what's your profit per square foot in your store? That's a really real thing. Yeah. Think about the distribution. What's it cost to ship edibles? So if I can sell a 10 milligram edible for significantly cheaper, just forget everything else, just distribution. Then you think about bottling, like we don't have the trucks. A lot of the time, beverage, interestingly, outside of cannabis, you're operating at like break even to a loss until you get acquired by a big beverage company. So look, I think it's possible to be growth. I think that we still need to see a real consumer shift. And I don't know how much that's regulatory, like our restaurants, people talk about restaurants. Are restaurants going to want to sell it is an interesting question, because you don't make your money in restaurants off selling food. You really make off selling alcohol. And if you start selling a cannabis beverage, I don't think that you're going to have a lot of people, purchasing alcohol. They may stay longer, they're, spend less. So maybe as a dessert, but we're still sort of sitting on the sidelines. I think, we've got a lot of growth in other areas. I still think edibles is a ton of opportunity. I just have never, I've never really been as bullish as others. I also think we haven't invested in it. We don't have a natural advantage outside of some of the, IP we have. I feel like we could grow pretty well in the other categories though. And I don't know, it's interesting. How many people do you know? Everyone knows that you can buy them and is shocked to see them. But how many of your friends do you see drinking cannabis versus all the other formats?
Well, I'll tell you, it's more in the States where either whether it's not legal or the hemp derived ones are available at the corner store as opposed to having to go to a dispensary. I'm sad to say I don't remember the last time I bought one at a dispensary in Canada. Although I think if you're going to a party, you bring like a 6-pack, maybe you bring 1 or 2 for myself. But it's not everything you just described. I believe is true, and I think the hemp derived spike that you see in the States is because it's the easiest thing to access,
right,
in illegal markets or unregulated no cannabis market. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think there's a balance between innovating and then trying to change consumer behavior. We try to innovate, but understand what a consumer wants and push towards that. So if we saw a really large shift in consumer behavior, it's something we would certainly respond to. But I think, we want to just try to be best in class in other categories. And if we see that shift, it's something we would look at.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I always appreciate you're always very blunt assessments of where the industry is, but also really good perspective because you've done more thinking about it than most about where consumer behavior is, where markets are going across different markets. So I appreciate the time, which now has become like a quarterly basis.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
We'll set the calendar now for the next one. Mike Gorenstein, the chairman and CEO of Cronos. Thank you so much. Jeremy Burke, our editor-in-chief here at Cultivated. We will be back tomorrow with This Week in Cannabis News, powered by Dutchie. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.